Good day, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Two-Generation Strategies to Engage and Serve Low-Income Fathers webinar. All lines have been placed on a listen-only mode. If you should require assistance throughout the conference, please press star 0 on your telephone keypad to reach a live operator. There will be a question and answer session at the very end of the presentation. At this time, it is my pleasure to turn the floor over to your host, Jessica Pearson. Ma'am, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. My name is Jessica Pearson. I direct the Center for Policy Research in Denver and co-direct the Fatherhood Research and Practice Network. And I want to introduce you to my colleagues at FRPN. My co-director is Jay Fagan of Temple University. Rebecca Kaufman is a senior research coordinator. Nancy Thonis is a consultant on the project. So next I want to tell you a little bit about FRPN before introducing our panel. It's a 5-year cooperative agreement between OPRI, Office of Planning, Research and Evaluation, and Temple University and Center for Policy Research. We are, as of yesterday, starting our 5th year, and our mission is to build practice and research in the fatherhood field. We target programs that are serving low-income fathers, and we work with all kinds of programs, grantees, state fatherhood commissions, CBOs, other public and privately funded programs, and researchers in all settings. So at FRPN, we've had 3 goals. One has been to promote rigorous evaluation, and to that end, we've made 13 awards totaling $850,000 to research and practitioner teams around the country to do more rigorous research about fatherhood programs and their benefits. We've developed outcome measures for non-resident fathers that are posted on our website that have been validated and are now in wide use in the fatherhood field. And we are currently doing research on maternal engagement and co-parenting in a number of settings. We work to build evaluation capacity and practitioner capacity. And to that end, we hold quarterly webinars like the one we're doing today. We conduct one-day certificate programs for practitioners in a variety of national and statewide, local fatherhood commissions and summits around the country. We write and post briefs on relevant issues pertaining to practice and research, including issues dealing with intimate partner violence, measuring key outcomes, dealing with economic security, and various aspects of rigorous research. And finally, we work hard to disseminate information, and we have an electronic newsletter that comes out every month, the blueprint, and a very robust website that we welcome you to visit and subscribe to our newsletter and subscribe to our listserv. So today's webinar deals with two-generation approaches. And I think as an intro, it's just relevant to review why we picked this topic. First, we think it's where we know that research increasingly shows that children benefit when fathers are involved in their lives. There's a growing interest in two-gen approaches to reducing poverty, and in point is the National Governors Association and CLASP initiative, along with Aspen Institute's work on two-gen approaches. Most of that focuses on mothers and children, but it's sort of a new buzz in the policy world. We know that fatherhood programs struggle to enroll, engage, and retain low-income fathers in services that aim to improve their parenting abilities. And we think that two-generation approaches may be more appealing to fathers than traditional class formats, and those are programs that involve fathers and children simultaneously. We also think that two-generation approaches may provide opportunities for fathers to practice their parenting skills and for staff to observe and work with fathers on their interactions with children. So they may have important outcome benefits as well as engagement. And we have some experiments with non-traditional activity-based parenting time formats that involve fathers and children, and they are showing some promising results and challenges. So that was our thinking in organizing today's panel, and we have a fabulous array of speakers. We're going to be hearing about Just Beginnings, also known as Baby Elmo. We're going to be hearing about the Fathers and Sons program, and we're going to be hearing about the Coaching Our Acting Out Children program. We're first going to start with a presentation by Rachel Barr and Terry Harak, and they have worked together on the Just Beginning program. And Rachel is going to start off with that, with their presentation, and Terry will work with her from there. So, Rachel.
Well, my name is Rachel Barr from the Georgetown Early Learning Project, and today I'm presenting along with Terry Harak. Do you want to introduce yourself, Terry?
Hello, my name is Terry Harak. I'm with Youth Law Center.
And today we're going to tell you about the Just Beginning program, which is an intervention program for incarcerated teen fathers. And this project began in 2008, and from the very outset, it was a collaborative research practitioner project between the Youth Law Center and Georgetown Early Learning Project. And I'll get to later why it was dubbed by the fathers themselves as the Baby Elmo Project. Like I said, it was developed by myself and Carol Schofer of the Youth Law Center. We met at 0 to 3 program, which brought together researchers and practitioners. And at the time, Carol had a client. Her name was Naomi. She was incarcerated at the time, and she didn't have any contact with her son. And when she did, it was in a very stark and unwelcoming visitation space. At that point, we knew that we had to think about some sort of a solution to improve the quality and quantity of visitation between incarcerated youth and their young children, and we knew that we would have to take a two-generational approach. So this Just Beginning program arose out of this initial collaboration, and it's a model that is research-based and evidence-informed, and we take a unique approach to research, relationship building. Much of what was just described to you before. We include structured visits, we include video modeling, and this curriculum is based on skill building. And through that, we hope to build a stronger relationship between fathers and their young children. This really is an identified need. Incarceration, of course, significantly interferes with father involvement and investment, and this is really a large problem in the United States, where 2.5 million children have parents who are incarcerated. And the key point is that 92% of those incarcerated parents are actually fathers. And we chose, however, to focus on the juvenile incarcerated population because there's a lot of scope for parenting education within the detention facilities. And a little known fact even now is that 20 to 30%, based on a number of different estimates, of all incarcerated teen males are actually fathers. So there really is a need here. And this is not just a problem for the fathers being separated from the babies. This is a two-generational program. Children of incarcerated parents are at higher risk for negative outcomes over and above other risk factors that they face, such as poverty or financial burden. Specifically, children of incarcerated parents are at higher risk of delinquency and teen pregnancy themselves. So we had a look at the research out there and found a model by Ross Park and Clark Stewart. And what you can see here on this diagram is that there are a number of complex factors that determine the effect of parental incarceration on child adjustment. Obviously, the characteristics of the parents, social support that they're facing, and who is looking after the child outside of the prison context are important. However, what we chose to focus on was one important place we could make a change, and this was the opportunity for contact and visitation. And what you can see in this diagram is that this opportunity for contact and visitation not only has positive impact on the child and their child outcomes, but it also has a reciprocal effect on the positive effect on the incarcerated parent. So by improving the contact and opportunity for visits, we can then have effects on both generations. And we decided to build our Just Beginnings around this model. And well known to this group is that the research base has really been growing very dramatically over the past 2 decades. And knowledge is accumulating that father involvement is really associated with a number of positive outcomes for young children, particularly if fathers and their young children have sensitive and supportive relationships with one another. So if they can be engaged in responsive interactions that are cognitively stimulating, that involve physical play and caregiving activities and are warm and engaging, these factors are particularly predictive of positive outcomes for young children. So, to summarize, what is the origin then of the Just Beginning program? The 2 things that I've just told you is that there is an identified need for teen fathers and their young children to form relationships with one another. The second is that there is a growing body of research identifying critical importance of fathers on positive child outcomes. And the final piece of our intervention is that there is a growing body of knowledge around intervention design showing that active, engaged interventions are likely to lead to both better learning of new skills and retention and application of those skills across time. So our intervention design absolutely includes this active and engaged component. So as an overview of our program, the Just Beginning Fathers program focuses on skill building with the ultimate purpose of building a positive relationship between fathers and their young children and maintaining that relationship. We have non-traditional parenting classes. These are not classroom format. Rather, our parenting classes focus on relationship skill building and modeling of actions via video. And then the fathers and their children get to interact and play with one another. So now Terry is going to describe the program to you.
Great. Thanks, Rachel. And thank you to FRPN for inviting us to do this. And thanks to my partner, Rachel Barr, for letting me be the practitioner side of this research and practitioner partnership. I feel that I have one of the best jobs in the world, being able to go around and help implement the Just Beginning programs inside facilities. So the first part of our program is going to be changing the environment and training the facilitators. So I don't know how many of you have spent time in institutions or juvenile facilities, but you see the picture here on the left, the space for visitation usually happens in big open spaces, maybe cafeterias or actual visitation centers, and it's usually very cold and sterile environment, clearly not private. Usually this furniture is bolted down. it's not child-friendly, and it's not really father-friendly. It's not set up to be a space to have a positive parent-child interaction. On the right, you see what spaces look like after we've come in and set up a Just Beginning space. It doesn't cost a lot to set up these spaces. A few toys, these kind of mats on the ground here are signature to our rooms. We have different types of spaces. So we have what we call a pop-up space. This is from our Ohio site, and this room is actually a multi-purpose room in the institution. It's used for classrooms, it's used for church. So the fathers come in and set up this room, put it together, lay out the toys, and then it can be broken down and used for other purposes. Engaging the fathers in the play space. This is one of my favorite rooms in a California site. And we'll talk a little bit later about the curriculum, but this room here has actually incorporated some of the curriculum into the room. So it's really neat for trainers and for fathers to be able to look around the room and in the artwork see some of our concepts and lessons. This room was also done by fathers in the Just Beginnings program. The impact on the staff that the room has. So when we first come into a facility that's interested in doing the Just Beginnings program, and we take a look at space and decide what type of space they're going to have, some of our facilities across the country have dedicated full-time rooms that are always used for the Just Beginnings program, and some of them need to use that pop-up space. But the space allows this opportunity for the father and child to interact, for them to be able to have a positive interaction and a positive environment, but it also changes the way that staff work with fathers. So the picture on my left is from California with some California probation staff setting up mats for the Just Beginnings room. And it's not something that probation staff often find themselves doing. So that alone kind of sets a different tone for the interaction between probation staff and the father. And then here on the right are some Just Beginnings facilitators from our California site who don't always have the opportunity to hold dolls and teddy bears and baby Elmo items. And so it really changes how these institutional correctional staff interact with the teen parents. Staff training, we also use the rooms to kind of conduct staff training in them. And you can see on the left is from our California site there with, we have trained as low as 4 staff. In California, they wanted to train as many staff as possible, so we had about 30 in that training. Training is a 2-day process where we go in and train staff on the curriculum and also on how to set up the Just Beginning spaces. On the right over here, we're having an implementation planning session, and that's something that we do kind of throughout the process and weekly kind of check in with facilitators and see how they're doing by email and phone, but then we also come in and do site assessments, so that's what's happening there. So now we're on to, so we've done the first step of this is changing the environment, which is a huge piece of it. We've made a child-friendly space. We've created an environment where staff and fathers can interact differently. And now we get ready for the parent training sessions that are broken down into easy to understand concepts and using media. So the overall goal of the Just Beginnings program is to develop a relationship with the child and communication. So relationship formation and communication. A lot of teen parents that I meet have said, oh, I've been through all types of parenting programs. I've sat through classrooms. Ours is completely different, where you'll get a curriculum piece, but then you actually come in with that child interaction, that hands-on work. So our session 1 is notice, session 2 is follow, 3 is talk, 4 is encourage, and 5 is putting it all together. And it's a spiral curriculum, so everything builds upon each other. Using media, I think Rachel had said before, that's kind of where the name of the Just Beginnings program came from, because we use the Sesame Beginnings videos. This is a great opportunity for our young fathers to have the concept in a visual and audio way. And at first, a lot of people say, oh, I don't want to watch this Baby Elmo stuff and Sesame videos. And by the end of the fathers watching these videos, they are singing all the songs that go with it and are really engaged. In one of our just beginning rooms, we had a child take her first step, and then the father was singing to her the same song that Dad Elmo sang to baby Elmo when he was taking his first step. But I will turn this over to you for a minute, Rachel, to talk about the next 2 slides in media.
So the reason we incorporated media is that prior research had suggested that these video models were very useful, particularly if there were conditions of lower literacy, then this would be a very useful way for information to be learned. So we're actually taking a strengths-based approach, but the interventions were most effective if the video modeling was accompanied by feedback. And so this is where our facilitators are really important. We took these Sesame Beginnings videos. They were designed with a 2-generational approach in mind, actually. Sesame Street from the beginning always included 2-generational approach. From the very first show where Robert Earl Jones was the guest through now where major celebrities come on to encourage parents to learn some of the same lessons along with their child. So taking that approach, these videos have built in important skills like encouraging your baby. And now back to the fun part.
So this is the really exciting part where you have the parent-child visit. So, imagine, again, our work here is based in correctional facilities that often don't have child-friendly visitation rooms set up, often aren't used to even having children come into a facility. So we've created that space. We've given the teen father the sessions, the 5 sessions through the curriculum, and now we're getting to my favorite part, the hands-on work where the baby actually comes into the facility. So this is a picture of a father and his daughter from one of our sites out west, and you can see that the father, on the ground, he's engaged with his child, he's sitting with her at eye level with her, and these are all types of skills that the father is learning during the sessions. It is not uncommon for me, the first thing to hear from fathers that are incarcerated is talking with them that they feel that their children do not like them. They're worried that their child doesn't like them, their child's angry at them, and through our curriculum, our first piece of notice goes through stranger anxiety and of forming bonds and attachment, and so fathers can start to understand that no, their child doesn't hate them or doesn't dislike them, and then they can start to learn these play techniques to have a successful play session. This is another father who you see the balloons around. This is actually a birthday party. I believe this was a first or second birthday for his child. First birthday for his child that he planned while he was incarcerated. He invited staff to the party. He made art invitations. And I think, Rachel, you have a exciting story about the letters there and the mats.
Yeah, so on the mats include letters, and one other father, his daughter came in and she was a little bit older and she was starting to spell her own name. It was a very short name. But the father realized that she was starting to learn to read. He himself couldn't read, so what he did is he reached out to staff and said, look, I'd really like to learn to read myself now so that I can be sharing this experience with my daughter as she learns to read. So this really was very much a 2-generational effect, with the child actually having an effect on the parent in this case.
Absolutely. The next slide here, we have a father changing the diaper. So this is an opportunity also for the fathers to participate in things that they want to be there for those moments, and even such as these as being able to change their child's diaper. So all of our rooms have changing tables and are set up for fathers to also participate in those types of skills. So during the play session, the parent interacts with the child using the skills, and the facilitator, that's our staff who have been trained, are there to kind of give examples, and they have a checklist and notice what the father is doing during the play session so that they can have a successful post-session debrief. And in the debrief, it would be similar to something a facilitator or trainer would say, I like the way you really praised your baby when you were playing the blocks together. She really responded well to that and smiled at you. So everything that we are having the fathers do, we're actually having our facilitators, our trainers mirror that type of interaction as well. So a quick summary of the intervention design. We changed the environment. We set up those friendly spaces. We have the lessons broken down to easily understood topics. We use media for clear audio-visual examples and hands-on learning when the child comes in. This was a video that we aren't able to show today, but if you just Google us, it will pop up on YouTube. I really encourage you to do that so you can have a chance to hear a father talk directly about the program and his co-parent about what it's meant for them. Rachel, I'm going to turn it over to you.
And in the last few minutes, I just wanted to, we wanted to demonstrate how we've done pre-post evaluations to examine how fathers are actually doing and how their babies are responding. And what we do is we take videos during the play sessions, and during those play sessions, we literally measure each of the skills that we are trying to teach the fathers. So we examine play skills, following the lead, talking and encouraging. And what we can see here in our initial iteration of the program, it was a longer program. It was actually 8 sessions long. We've cut it back to 5, pulling out the key ingredients. But what you can see here is the interaction scores, the parental support across those sessions, and using growth linear modeling, we see that this significantly increases over time as a function of the sessions going by. But I think what is more important here is the mirroring response of the infant. So as the parent engagement and support increases, so does the infant engagement, and that infant engagement then prompts the father to additional father support and engagement, and we have this lovely upward spiral, and in both cases we see this significant growth across sessions. We also, I want to break out how that looks for 2 skills in particular, how they're able to sort of build their play skills, but in particular how they're actually able to follow in and help the child build some autonomy by following the lead. And what we can see here is that they come in with some pretty good play skills, but they do increase significantly across time. Following the lead is actually a really difficult thing initially for the fathers, and they really increase in their skill over time. We can also see when we actually specifically measure the amount of talk and the amount of encouragement, and we compare that to initial levels, we see significant increases in encouragement and very near significant changes in talk. We've replicated this pre-post evaluation 3 times now in 3 different sites with different facilitators, and we replicate these findings 3 times. We also talk to the fathers about their attitude, and we use an interview that was developed for foster parents that has been associated with better child self-esteem outcomes and higher likelihood that foster parents will adopt. So we thought this would be a good strategy. And what we find is initially these fathers have pretty good commitment to their children. This is partly because initially what they are coming in, they need to have somewhat of a working relationship with the co-parents or the caregivers of their child, which quite often is grandparents. Speaking of now, then 3 generations that end up being in this program. So their commitment starts relatively high, but what increases significantly over time is their acceptance of their child. So the acceptance of who they are. They literally describe their child in significantly more detail, what their personality is like, what they like about their child, what they find interesting, what they think is interesting to their child. So they literally get to know their child. And more importantly, they also believe that they're going to have influence over their child, both in the short term and the long term, which they really didn't before the intervention. It also has effect on their behavior within the facility. So their number of infractions are higher before the start of the program. Visits continue during the program and after the program, and then the number of behavioral infractions that the youth have in their interactions outside of the program stay lower after the program. So what our next steps is that we are actually now, having completed these pre-post evaluations, we haven't been able to implement an RCT in the justice facilities due to small numbers and the number of different sites that we have. But we are currently working on an office with the Office of Family Assistance on a sponsored program. We're just beginning, is currently being implemented in responsible fatherhood programs in the community in a randomized trial. And we hope to learn more about extending this program to the community and whether or not these pre-post effects can be replicated and extended in a more controlled design. So in the last seconds here, what have we learned? We've learned that these fathers can and do learn important skills. We see it literally in front of us. We realize that the structure of the program is absolutely essential. It is research-based content. The facilitators are well trained. The media presentation helps the fathers. And there's this active learning component where the father can receive direct feedback. We think all of these ingredients are crucial. We also obviously think that the evaluation is critical in the training on site. We have maintained fidelity by checking in frequently with the staff via remote technical assurance, and we contact and continue to improve the program all the time using ongoing evaluations. So thank you very much. This is who we would like to thank as well.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, next we're going to move on to Cleopatra Caldwell, who will be talking about fathers and sons.
Okay, thank you so much. Good afternoon. I'm delighted to be a part of this panel because I think this is a very exciting topic when we talk about two-generation families and fatherhood programs. And I am talking about the Fathers and Sons program today, and this is a program that we designed using a community-based participatory process, working with our partners in Flint, Michigan. And that involves several community-based organizations in Flint and the Genesee County Health Department. And we developed this program also by involving non-resident African-American fathers and non-resident African-American sons as well. That was critical because we didn't have a curriculum when we first started this work many years ago now. And our first step was to develop a relevant curriculum for these families. So one of the things that was extremely important for us was that in our partnership, we have an academic community partnership. Our partners were very concerned about the state of young boys in Flint. And our approach to programming had to do with who is it that can provide an additional level of support for boys prior to leaving the family. In our case, that was non-resident African-American fathers. So that's how we ended up focusing on that topic specifically. We were fortunate in that our original funding came from the CDC, and when we designed this program, the original goals was to strengthen bonds between non-resident African-American fathers and their pre-adolescent sons to prevent or reduce substance use, violent behavior, and early sexual initiation among sons by improving fathers' parenting behaviors. So that was a kind of different approach because many programs at the time were just focusing on the child without involving the family. And for us, we were involving non-resident fathers. Another thing that our community partners, however, wanted to emphasize was some positive health behaviors as well. So we incorporated a component of the study that looked at physical activity and requests for services among fathers. So that became really important. We used a quasi-experimental design in order to evaluate what we had developed at that point, and we had an intervention group versus a comparison group with a pre-test, post-test design and a 4-month follow-up. But the other thing that was really very important about what we were doing is that we used theories to guide our approach to the work that we were doing, and we involved the intergenerational aspects of African-American families, which is a cultural strength of African-American families. So culture became an important part of what we were doing. And we were also sensitive to the fact that we were dealing with African American men and boys. So the gender side of it became important in terms of the kinds of activities we developed. And also we had to pay attention to developmental considerations, because bringing a child into an intervention with an adult is a special context, and you have to prepare your facilitators for being able to deal with both. The sample for our study was non-resident African American fathers, and their sons were 8 to 12 years old. We were picking up the children before they left the household. They were still very much still attached to the household, which meant that the non-resident father influence didn't have to compete so much with peer influences. In total, we had 287 families that participated in this particular intervention program, 158 families in the intervention group and 129 families in the comparison group. That's both African American non-resident fathers and son families. In the curriculum, we had 15 sessions, and that was delivered over a 2-month period. And that was really important because, again, working with the non-resident fathers and sons themselves, they were the ones who helped us understand what it was that would be useful for them as we were trying to find out how often we should have the program, for example. We ended up with an 85% participation rate for the intervention group. The comparison group was a little lower because we didn't have an activity for them to do, but overall we ended up with a 79% participation rate in what we were doing. And we think a lot of that had to do with we engaged the fathers and sons themselves and helping us understand what would be good for them. One of the things that we did notice in doing this work was that although we had originally been funded to pay a lot of attention to how enhancing fathers' parenting behaviors would have an influence on the son's outcome, particularly these risk behavior outcomes, we also began to notice that the intervention itself was doing more than just enhancing the parenting behaviors of fathers, that fathers were also benefiting from interacting in the program with their sons, because it was a requirement that both the fathers and the sons had to participate in the intervention together. So building on that experience, we paid more attention to what was happening, and we were able to receive funding from the National Institutes of Health to do a randomized controlled trial now that actually looks at outcomes for fathers in addition to the sons. So we still keep our initial focus in terms of looking at the father's parenting behaviors and its impact on the risk behaviors of sons, but we're also now looking at reducing depressive symptoms and substance use and increasing the use of services among fathers. And this is what we call Parenting in Men's Health, the utility of the Fathers and Sons program, primarily because we make an argument that parenting is good for men's health. So having good relationships with their children have benefits beyond just what happens to the child, but also what happens to the children. The fathers. And one of the things that I should mention is that when we do this work, we are focusing on several innovative aspects. One has to do with the population we work with. Another has to do with the fact that we are guided by theory. The other curriculum content tends to be culturally sensitive, and this intergenerational effect. So having 2 generations in the intervention itself, we found to be a tremendous benefit. When we focus on the population, as I mentioned, we have 8 to 12-year-old boys. We also dealt with the biological father of that child who was non-resident. But we were also finding that non-resident fathers are not a monolithic group, that there are various characteristics that we paid attention to, because some of the fathers in our program who were non-resident to the child, who was a part of the Fathers and Sons program, was a resident father to other children. And that then becomes an area that we would want to focus on in the intervention itself, because the meaning of families across households differed depending on who the families were. We also found that living arrangements mattered, and they were different. There were some fathers who lived with their child up until about age 5 was the average age. But then, of course, we had some fathers who had not lived with their child at all. So all of these were important for us to consider as we did this work. What I'm presenting now is the theoretical model for the Fathers and Sons program. And don't know, I think my cursor does show. What we have here is building on several theories. We are looking at the Fathers and Sons program to directly influence outcomes for fathers. And these outcomes in this area has to do with the interpersonal relationship with the son, involvement with son, social support, issues of race socialization, monitoring, communication, and role modeling. So these were really very important for us to influence in this intervention. And our thought was influencing these would have a direct impact on fathers themselves, his sense of being competent as a father, the kind of stress that he would undergo, his father role identity, and the attitudes and subjective norms around some of the health behaviors that we were interested in influencing. But that being said, we had an expectation that these interactional characteristics is what would have influenced the outcomes for the sons, but it got mediated through their attitudes about the health behaviors, emotion regulations, basically their behavioral intentions. And what's an important part of behavioral intentions for both fathers and sons is this idea of subjective norms. And subjective norms actually suggest that if you understand what important people in your life think, and you're highly motivated to do what those important people think, that's one of the things that will encourage behavior change or prevention. So from a two-generation perspective, we were having boys who communicated with their fathers around specific issues so they understood what their fathers expected of them, and then they were motivated to make those kinds of changes and efforts. That's what we thought would have an impact on outcomes, and outcomes for the sons, depression, substance use, aggressive behavior as a precursor to youth violence and sexual behavior. But fathers themselves, we were also interested in their substance abuse behavior, depression, and use of services. And this was important for us because one of the things that we found within the context of the intervention, there's a lot that we can do, there's a lot of success that we have, but we're also interested in sustaining those changes. And in order to sustain those changes, we had to address some of the needs that fathers had outside of parenting. So that's why an important part of our new study, which we're conducting in Chicago, Illinois, is to connect fathers to needed services and track whether or not they use those services and what impact that might have when we do follow-up evaluations. Because in our new study, we are doing the same intervention, but we're following them at post-test, and then we have 3 follow-ups after that, 6 months after the intervention ends, a year after, and 18 months after it ends, because we're interested in the long-term impact of the intervention itself. So basic curriculum was developed again in Flint, Michigan, and the intervention was done in Flint, and the comparison group was done in Saginaw, Michigan, which has very similar characteristics to Flint. We conducted 15 sessions over a 2-month period for a total of 45 curriculum hours, 2 to 3 hours for per session. We also had homework assignments for the fathers and community events that they participated in as a part of community service events. And then, of course, the evaluation questionnaires and boosters. So that's the basic description of the program. One of the things that I do want to highlight, areas of the curriculum linked to theory, but also that emphasize the two-generation approach. And if we start in the top right slice of the pie here, we see that race socialization is an important part of that. And that's how fathers communicate with their child about what it means to be a black boy, what it means to be a black man in this society. Again, we're dealing with African-American non-resident fathers, so this really was an important strategy to be able to incorporate in the intervention, and we knew that it would have influences on the idea of racial identity. Behavioral capacity comes from social cognitive theory, and this has to do with skill building. And some of the skill building that we focused on was around parenting behavior. And here, monitoring is critical. And we have exercises because part of what happens is how does a parent monitor when they're not in the household with the child? So those were issues that we focused on in the intervention itself. And then we also know that the father and son, they're not out there alone. They're part of social networks. So we had several social network activities to influence that idea of connectedness, but an important part of one of the social mapping activities had to do with who were the important people in the child's life, and did the father know who they were? That included both family members as well as peers, because we know, again, monitoring is critical to prevent youth risk behaviors. Then this idea of self-efficacy, how confident the father felt in doing his job as a parent, how confident they each felt in, one example, communicating with each other. Because you can't understand anything about subjective norms if you're not talking. You have to understand people's values, people's expectations for you. So building in this efficacy around these kinds of communication skills became important, and we focused on general communications as well as risk behavior communication. And then finally, this whole idea of modeling, role modeling. We worked with fathers around the idea that they were the role models to their child. We had an exercise where we focused on, for example, role reversal activities between the fathers and sons, where we had sons act out father's behavior when he was drinking. This was a component of the intervention that often we saw grown men cry, and that was because their young son could act out their behavior. And one of the things that it brought to their attention was the fact that behaviors that they thought they were hiding, children are very aware of. And one of the things we really understand is that children learn what they live. So that emphasis on fathers' behavior as a role model and not simply saying, do what I say, not what I do, was emphasized as not being good enough if you really wanted to have your son achieve the kinds of expectations that they had for them. So we infused culture throughout the intervention. This became a very important part of the curriculum because we had things like Ghanaian symbols, the Dinkra symbols from Africa, where they used those symbols, which were wisdom, words of wisdom from an African culture in Ghana, as a way to name their group. And they named their group using these symbols. We also had poetry from Maya Angelou to craft a Black family pledge against violence. We also engaged in community service projects that reinforced that idea of connections. So what I'll do now is just present very quickly a few findings from the study, the evaluation part of the Flint study, to show the connection between fathers and sons. We had the intervention influencing fathers' reports of their satisfaction with their parenting, and that then influenced fathers' reports of his monitoring behavior, and monitoring behavior by fathers were also reported by sons. So this link, this influenced fathers monitoring sons more, sons feeling monitored by fathers, had a direct influence on sons' pro-social attitudes about sex. The other path that shows the same thing is through direct communication, because fathers' reports of communication of talking to his son about sex and the sons receiving that information and also reporting that they talk with their father about sex also had a direct impact on the son's pro-social attitudes. And this is the pattern that we found. This was consistent with our theoretical orientation, and we found improving fathers' risk communication was linked to sons' intention to avoid risky behaviors generally, intentions to avoid early sexual debut, and also receiving those race socialization messages that were important for fathers to communicate. And improving non-resident fathers' communication about risky behaviors was also associated with less aggressive behaviors in boys. And that was important because that's linked to youth violence. And increasing fathers' contact Improving father-son relationship, enhancing father's intentions to exercise was associated with more intentions to exercise in son. So all of these are showing this link between enhancing father's behavior and having positive outcomes for son. But we didn't find any direct effect of the intervention on sons themselves. On the other side of it, we looked at the intervention's influence, and fathers reported fewer depressive symptoms. They had and for those who had a good relationship with their son, that was linked to less depressive symptoms among fathers and less drinking among fathers. But we did have an interesting finding around the co-parenting issue. When fathers reported having a good relationship with the mother of their child, and they also reported this masculine identity that had a kind of cultural orientation to it, or a social justice kind of orientation in terms of working for the good of others, they reported more depressive symptoms. So this suggests a level of complexity in these relationships that's really important to understand. And from our perspective, we on many occasions conclude that non-resident African fathers can improve their parenting skills in a family-centered program that involves their son. Cultural sensitivity is critical for creating that safe environment for fathers and sons in intergenerational programming, and involving fathers and sons in the program together can improve outcomes for both the father and the son. So one of the things that we always leave our families with is that every moment that you're together is a teachable moment, and that's where they share values and expectations that becomes important for fathers to communicate with sons, but just as important for sons to communicate with fathers. That's the end of my presentation, but I just
Thank you so much, Cleo. We are, I want to brag a bit and say that Cleo is one of our FRPN grantees, and FRPN is sponsoring one of the follow-up evaluations, iterations in the Chicago study, and we're very excited about that. So, moving on, we next turn to Greg Fabiano on his coaching program. And Greg, take it away.
Thank you. I want to just start out by mentioning a little bit about how we got interested working in the two-generational program. We were doing a lot of parenting intervention programs, and as we looked around the room, we noticed that most of the time fathers weren't present. And it was funny because this was part of a program where the kids would be in summer programming or after-school programming during the day. And oftentimes the sidelines of our gymnasium or on the side of our t-ball or baseball field, at the end of the day, lots of dads would show up early to come and watch their kids play in the sports. And we started to look in the mirror a little bit as providers, and we thought, well, if we can't get the dads to come to our parenting groups, maybe we'll bring the parenting groups to the dads. And that's how we've come up with our program that was called the Coaching Our Acting Out Children. We're working mostly with kids with behavioral challenges at the time, although as I will share with you as we go along, we've adapted our program to be more preventative-based in some settings, and in some cases we've worked with all children in a particular program, and it seems like it has worked okay. What the Coaches program does is combine two existing programs that have been around for a long time for kids with ADHD or other challenging behaviors. So the first is what has been called the Summer Treatment Program, which is a day camp, essentially, where kids engage in arts and crafts. They spend some time in a classroom, and there is an emphasis on getting the kids to be part of sports activities. We like it because it promotes physical activity, but also helps them learn how to be part of a team. As many of you know that have been around sports, it helps children deal with success and failure in appropriate ways. It helps them feel kind of a sense of being part of something bigger because they are part of a team. And our summer treatment program looks a lot like any typical after-school program activity or summer camp or summer school activity, with the exception of interwoven into all the activities is a really intensive behavioral facilitation program where kids can earn points or camp privileges if they're doing things the right way and meeting daily goals, and they lose points or they have some problem-solving discussions with staff if they are behaving negatively or not meeting goals that are set. That's one evidence-based program. The other one is the Community Parent Education Program, which is a parent training program developed by Chuck Cunningham which is very similar to many of the other existing programs that are out there, with one exception. It's geared towards working with large groups. So parents attend together as a group, and the facilitator doesn't stand up front and tell them all the things they're supposed to do as good parents. Rather, parents meet with other parents in small groups in facilitated discussions, come up with their own ideas of what might help them in their own parenting, what goals they might have for themselves or their child or their family, and then they think about how they might deploy those ideas in the weeks ahead. We took these two programs that have been around for a long time, we kind of combined them together to create the Coaches program. What we do practically is, for the first hour, the dads meet with other dads, and they talk about different parenting strategies each week, how to catch their child being good, how to give effective instructions or requests or commands, how to ignore kind of the minor things that kids sometimes do. We teach them how to choose their battles. We teach them about timeout. And during that time, the kids are practicing soccer skills, how to dribble, shoot, pass, the rules of the game. In some of our other programs, we've used different activities. The activity itself doesn't seem to be super important for the kids, except that it has to be something that the kids want to do and are motivated to attend the program to engage in. We pick soccer because it's an easy sport for anybody to pick up. Even if you're not extremely athletic, we can get kids out on the soccer field and they can do a decent job and be proud of themselves when they're done. You can contrast it with something like baseball. If you can't hit a baseball and you strike out every time you go up to bat, we might lose that kid eventually. And so that's the reason why we picked that sport. Here's just a quick outline of the sorts of things we might cover, as I mentioned. Then during the second hour, we put the dads and the kids together and they do a soccer game. We try to mimic what a typical community Little League would look like. We have a referee, we keep score. But the dads have a special job during the game. We make them our coaches. And the coaches don't just stand on the sideline and watch the game. We give them some tasks to do each period with their child. So, for example, if we just covered catching your child being good, they'll have a little assignment during the first quarter to try to give their child 5 labeled praise statements. After the quarter's over, the kids go off and get a water break, and we get the dads together and we ask them how it went. And every program kind of runs the same. The first week, after the first quarter, all the dads kind of look down at the ground at their shoes, and everybody knows, oh, I didn't give 5 of these statements, and somebody will say, well, I'm going to try to do it this way in the next quarter, and most of them meet that goal. And as it goes on, by the 3rd or 4th or 5th week, it's remarkable. You stand on the sideline and all you hear is dads cheering on their own child, cheering on other people's children. The dads are high-fiving one another and cheering each other on. And so the whole climate changes as the dads practice these strategies and they see their child start to respond positively to them in this sort of environment. As I mentioned, the COPE program that Chuck Cunningham developed is group-based. The parents, it's pretty straightforward. The parents watch some exaggerated errors of parents kind of working with their kid. It's pretty clear what went wrong, but we put the fathers in an expert role. They can identify those errors. We ask them to think about what the consequences of those errors might be for their relationship with the child, and then they identify what they would do. We ask them to give some advice to the parent in the video. What would you do differently? And so they can take some ownership over the solutions. I'm going to skip over a couple of slides here just in the interest of time. I'll mention for the kid component, something that sometimes people say is, well, how can we set up a whole soccer league? I'm not sure that that's necessarily what needs to be done. If you go to many communities, there are existing sports leagues that have fields, have gymnasiums. If you look at what kids do after school, the most common activity is organized sports. And so we do think that if we're going to help the kids we work with be successful in their daily life, their success in these organized sports environments is something we really do need to focus on, especially the kids with the behavior challenges who might have more of a difficult time listening to their coach's directions or dealing with disappointment or frustration on a sports field or in the gym. That's why we try to work really hard in our skill drills to develop sports competencies in the kids. We also think that this might help engage the dads if they see their kids improving in a particular skill area. That provides more motivation to attend our program each week. As an example of a drill that we might use with the kids. During the game, I mentioned that the dads help us referee, keep score, monitor the gameplay, and they have their little assignments to do each week. Here's an example of what a dad might have. They're keeping track of their child's behavior, make sure their child isn't getting benched for tease or bragging or boasting or poor sportsmanship during the game. And at the bottom of the slide, you can see where the dads, we ask them to check, label, praise. Every quarter, we ask them to count how many times they actually catch their kids being good during the context of the sport. And the monitoring is really helpful. Some dads will come back and say, boy, I thought I was doing a lot, but I'm looking at my card here and I didn't do it hardly at all. And so it also provides some motivation for them to continue to improve in that particular parenting strategy. As an aside, I ran into a dad a couple years ago that I worked with a long time ago, and he came right up and he said, I have to tell you, that program we did was so important. I never realized how important it was to say these compliments to my child every day, to catch him being good, to do those things that you're talking about with label phrase. It changed my whole family. You know, it really helped. And I was sitting there thinking, boy, that's great, but it seemed kind of intuitive to me that that's what you would want to do. And the next day, I had my car check engine light went on, and I went to the mechanic, and he popped the hood, and he said, well, oh, gee, you got a coolant problem here. And, of course, I said, oh, no, coolant problem, how much is this going to cost me? What am I going to have to do to fix this? And he said, oh, you just have to add a little coolant. I can do that right here. It won't cost you anything. And those two examples struck me at that time as thinking, we can really offer something to dads that maybe because it isn't their business to think about all these micro interactions that they have with kids every single day and how important they are to do good things in each of those and stack those up for lots of days in a row that turn into weeks and turn into months. Conveying that information to them and then helping them practice the ways to engage in those micro interactions in a really effective way is quite important. And that's something I think many of the folks on this call can probably contribute to dads and help them with that. We send out a little newsletter each week, just like a Little League might do, about who scored, who was a good sport. And I think it's important to acknowledge that our program is different in some ways. We don't approach dads as deficient. We don't say that you need to come to a class to learn how to be a better parent. We expect that they are a good parent and that we're going to improve their coaching skills in the context of a sporting event that their kids might also be improving in. We think that might reduce some stigma. Parents do like when their kids develop competencies in a particular area, and getting better at sports is a value many parents would have for their child. And the game is really fun, so there's a hook to get people to attend the parenting class and the skills training for the kid because they really enjoy getting out on the field or in the gym and playing the game and enjoying the healthy competition. We also like that the dads get a chance to practice the skills right away in a real-life setting in the sporting event. So I'll just tell you a little bit about some of our outcomes. We first looked to see how well our program worked relative to a wait list, so we randomly assigned dads, this is of elementary school age kids, to the coaches program or a wait list control, so those people got the program after the first group was done. We measured their parenting skills, and you can see here that the fathers in the waitlist group did not improve in their rates of praise at all, and the fathers that got the coaches program at the end of the program improved. They had about 2 more praise statements, labeled praise statements for their kid in a half-an-hour observation. So that might not seem super remarkable, but then think about if this wasn't just a half an hour, but turns into an hour, and dads are available about 3.5 to 4 hours to most kids on average each day. If in each of those half an hours each day they were praising their kids 2 more times, think about over the course of a year or 2 years or 5 years, what a different relationship the fathers in the coaches group would have with their kids relative to the fathers in the waitlist group. They would have had, hundreds of thousands of more positive interactions with their child potentially, if that finding holds over time. Here we have negative talk. You can see that this was a significant interaction effect. The dads in the coaches group reduced their negative talk, whereas the fathers in the waitlist group just stayed the same. And fathers in the coaches group rated their kids' behavioral challenges as less intense after the program. So they changed their perception on how much the kids' behavioral challenges were causing problems in the family or in their relationship with the dad. fathers were also widely satisfied with the coaches program afterwards. So we did a second study where we wanted to compare the coaches program to a traditional classroom-based parenting program. And so fathers in this program got randomly assigned to coaches or a traditional co-parent training program. The major difference being in that traditional program, there were no parent-child interactions. The children went to child care while the parents were in a parenting meeting. And I'll just skip ahead in the interest of time here. We did find that the dads that were in the coaches program, that's BPT on this graph, rated their kids as significantly more improved after the program than the fathers that were in the traditional parent training group. Attendance was better in the coaches group. So the red bar is the coaches' dads who attend about 80% of our sessions, whereas the fathers in the traditional group attended only about a little less than 75% of the sessions. Dads in the coaches group were also on time more often, and we think that that's an indicator of engagement. If you show up on time for when the program is going to be starting, suggests you're more interested in what's going on in that program than if you're showing up late. Child attendance was also better in the coaches group. And this graph is kind of an interesting one. If you look at this graph, the coaches group did do their homework more effectively. So we asked all the parents to practice the parenting strategies with their kids during the week. But as you can see from this graph, one thing's really clear. Dads don't do their homework very much at all, regardless of what group they were in. And when we saw this, one thought we had was, well, the dads in the coaches group definitely practiced the strategies because they walked right out of the door of the parenting class onto the soccer field and tried out the parenting strategies. One could argue 100% of them did their homework. They practiced the strategies. And if that's important in terms of the long-term maintenance of the skill building, the coaches group might do a better job with that. Fathers are also less likely to drop out. And the groups did not have a significant difference in their ratings of their satisfaction with their outcomes of the parenting group, but dads in the coaches group rated the processes better. They liked the program better. And if you're interested in long-term engagement with families, as we are in our families that we work with children with behavioral challenges, the process might be important because that allows parents to stick around for the long run because they like what they're getting in terms of the services the providers are giving them. So we have a couple recent extensions of the coaches program I'll just mention briefly. A colleague of mine in El Chaco in New York City said he was working with Head Start academies or centers, and they were interested in improving the literacy skills of the children in their programs, and he got a grant to look and see whether or not a coach's model could help promote more shared book reading amongst fathers and their children. And so they had 100 dads, and they randomly assigned the family to get the coaches program, not using sports in this example, but rather using shared book reading, and or a wait list. And these are effect sizes from this. The results were really impressive from an El Chaco study. The effect size in both negative parenting and positive parenting favored the coaches program, and that dads were doing more positive parenting and less negative parent training in the coaches program at the end of treatment relative to the wait list. They were also rating their kids as their kids' behavioral challenges as less intense, and this wasn't a sample selected for behavioral challenges. This was just a group of children that were in the Head Start programs where the fathers consented and enrolled in the study. And really interestingly, a distal outcome had some significant effects, in that some of the children's language abilities were better in the coaches group relative to the wait list, suggesting that the dad's additional time spent in these shared book reading activities promoted the children's early literacy skills in a statistically significant fashion. We have another grant that we're working on right now that's in process, I'll just mention, where we're training phys ed teachers and school counselors to run coaches as an after-school program as a way to get dads more engaged in schools, similar to my clinical observation in the parenting groups we were running in our university clinic. Schools also have a hard time getting dads engaged and involved, sometimes because there's not a clear role for the dads, something that they can do or something they can contribute to. And we think that a coaches program might be one way to do that, focused on helping kids with their academic skills and homework completion. And then we have a recent clinical trial that we just finished up here in Buffalo in a Head Start. We randomly assigned I think in the interest of time, I'm going to skip over our survey. We randomly assigned half of the dads to get a coach's after-school program or a wait list. And we had to adapt our program because we were working with really little ones here. These were 3- and 4-year-olds. We reduced the program length each week to an hour, and it became a 6-week program as opposed to an 8-week program. We skipped the separate parenting part where the kids were doing the skill building for an hour because we were afraid the kids would just be too worn out by the time the dad showed up. And so instead we had a 5-minute discussion where we had a skill of the day that the parents were supposed to practice with the kids. And we used a preventative approach. So we were inclusive of any dads, not just ones where the child was identified as having some behavioral challenges. And so, as I mentioned, we had 67 dads. Half went to a wait list, half went to the coaches program. Our proximal outcome at the end was how well the fathers were able to coach their kid in a shared parent-child activity. And the results were kind of interesting. We did not get a significant difference for praise. We had a trend in terms of fathers in the coaches program giving fewer commands in this interaction. But there was a significant effect. It was a large effect size showing that dads in the coaches group used less negative talk at the end of the program relative to the waitlist group and helping their kids get through this test. So they're less critical of their children as they were doing a test that frankly required a lot of instructions and directions. And again, similar to the results I showed you earlier with regard to the use of praise, if you can reduce the amount of critical comments a father has to use with a child, and it's not just happening here in our observation at the end of the study, but that's translating into differences in interactions and daily activities, you could presume that there are going to be changes in the long-term father-child relationship and interaction pattern that might have some benefits for the child. So across settings, across different groups, and using different activities, we've replicated now a number of times that we can effectively engage fathers in intervention. And I think it's because we make the intervention fun and interesting for the dads as well as delivering the treatment that we're looking for them to be able to receive. Fathers really like the shared parent-child activities, and so that's something that we've always tried to incorporate in all of our work. And I guess the only other thing I would say as a footnote, our attendance is great in some of our clinical programs. In a more preventative approach, we had more spotty attendance, but we still had good outcomes, which is something we're going to chase down and try to study a little more to see how much is needed to make a difference in families. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Greg. This is the question part of the your opportunity to ask questions. Do you want to tell us how people do that?
Yes, ma'am. The floor is now open for questions. If you have a question, please press star 1 on your telephone keypad at this time. Again, ladies and gentlemen, if you have a question, please press star 1 on your telephone keypad at this time.
I'm going, while they come in, I'm going to ask presenters a question. And that has to do with the role of mothers in these father-child activity interventions. Are you just doing these, or not just, but are you doing these interventions basically with parents who have good co-parenting relationships? How do you engage mothers? Many of the fathers in our programs, fatherhood programs, are non-resident and do not have good relationships, good co-parenting relationships. Talk about this a little bit, and I guess let's briefly hear from everyone. Maybe Cleo, do you want to start that?
Yes, I'm happy to start. One of the things with our program is that we actually recruit through mothers. There is just no easy way to identify non-resident fathers and also be in the age range that we're interested in for the child. So mom's usually our first point of contact. And all of our mothers do not necessarily have a good relationship with the father. We've had some mothers who say that I'm really invested in my child having a good relationship with his father, but the father and I really don't speak. So I will consent for the child to participate, but you have to contact the father to see if he will participate. So we know that there's a variation in terms of the nature of the relationship between the mom and the father, but I think one of the things in our approach to the work that we do is that both parents tend to be committed to the child.
Okay. Greg?
We've had different program setups. Sometimes we've worked just with the dad, and in those cases there was some benefit, I think, at times to having dads just talking to other dads. We guaranteed that the discussion was coming from another father or father figure as opposed to someone in a different parental role. In our other programs, we've consented dads, and they've been the target of our studies, but we've included other parents, and we've had good attendance in terms of the whole family sometimes attending, including sometimes they would invite grandparents or other folks, just like you would do at a community Little League. So the nature of the intervention program is comfortable for people. It's one that they may be familiar with from working with other children in the family, and we haven't had too much. The only thing I will say about including moms that we've noticed, I skipped over the survey, but we asked parents about a lot of attributes of programs, and dads seemed to be okay with just about anything and didn't really mind if the mother was attending or not. They were fine with attending together with them or separate. There was a significant finding where some moms prefer to attend a program without the dad, and our suspicion is that those are probably in the sorts of families Cleo might be talking about where there's some conflict or difficulties within the family.
And Rachel and Terry, in both institutional and non-institutional settings, is mother cooperation and participation pretty fundamental?
It is sometimes necessary to be able to transport the child to the facility, particularly, and in the community for the father to be able to have play with the child. However, one other area that's really we've found is that often grandparent involvement is really important. So even if the parents don't get on very well together, often the grandparents will have contact with the child, either on the father or the mother's side, and that can sometimes also bridge the gap. And much like Cleo said, the aim is for both parents is that the focus is on the importance of the child. The other thing is that because the mothers are bringing the child to the facility, we tell the mothers that it is very important for the fathers to have this time with their child, but they get to observe what the father is learning. So there is some positive effects there where both the mother can learn some of the information at the same time, but she can also observe that the father is becoming more involved with the child. And Terry, you had some other.
Okay, thank you. Oh, go for it. Sorry.
Oh, sure. I'll just quickly say the Just Beginnings program does have a co-parent piece. So, again, we're working with teen fathers who are incarcerated. So we're often working with the co-parent, the mother's parents, the teen father's parents, and whoever else is their support system, really getting that generational impact. But the mothers send a co-parent orientation, brochures, information. They're fully aware. They get up to date on the program and kind of are able to kind of see the benefits for the child, and that's really what we focus it on with a co-parent orientation.
Thank you.
So I'd just like to add real quickly with the Fathers and Sons program, one of the things that we do is we have a family orientation meeting a week before the intervention begins, and the mother is a part of that, along with the father and the child. That's an opportunity for them to get to know the family, the research staff, but also to get to know what is expected of the families over the course, because we're in their lives for a 2-month period or a little longer. And they have an opportunity to say anything they want, and we actually have a separate meeting with the moms to be able to find out anything that we need to know about the child's health, about whether or not he should be sent home with the father, all of those kinds of things. So she does have input in that way. We also invite mom back at the closing ceremony. So as the fathers and sons are getting their certificates, they actually have a graduation ceremony. Moms and other family members are invited to attend that too. We have had mothers who wanted to do things like provide food for the intervention just to have more hands-on. But one of the things the child does in the intervention is keep a journal. And we found that many times the child is reading what they write in their journal to their moms. They don't have to read it in the intervention. We're just trying to reinforce those academic skills in the child. But we find at the closing ceremony, mom would be happy to share what she learned through the child, through his participation in the intervention. So mom is involved, but just not in the safe space that we have set aside for fathers and sons to interact together and with other father-son families.
Thank you. Are there questions that have come in?
Yes, ma'am. We have our first question here from Ronald Bennington of Head Start.
Yes, my name is Ronald Bennington from Northwest Head Start, Tennessee, Northwest Tennessee. You spoke about grants for the after-school program. How do you apply for that?
Greg, I think that's your question.
We were applying through different funding mechanisms. Our projects have been funded a lot of different ways. A lot of what we do, since I work in a university, is research. However, I can't speak to your specific area, but one thing our Head Start partners will do here is look for local foundations that might be interested in putting their bucks behind a program that's going to promote better family functioning and father-child interactions and child skills. So if you wanted to follow up offline, I'd be happy to talk with you about some of the things we've done. Maybe you could think about how to work with some of your local community organizations to do similar things.
How do I contact you?
Well, is it not on a slide or? Okay.
No, I'm sorry. I'm not at the computer. I'm on my phone traveling.
It's my email, fabiano@buffalo.edu. And please don't get in an accident writing that down.
Yeah, you can contact us at FRPN and we'll put it out. How's that?
Yeah, whoever signed up for the webinar.
Thank you.
Thank you. And our next question comes from Kenneth Gillot of NCFR Council.
Hello. I'm actually a social worker, educator, and a counselor here in Flint, Michigan. So I was excited to hear some of the materials and the research done here because me personally, I am a child of an incarcerated parent for the last 33 years. And I gear and have passion to work with minorities, as I am one as well, in this low-income-based family. We have a very dramatic crisis in our hands here with the water situation in the last couple of years in Flint. However, I've been engaging families for the last 10 years, and I've ran into some troubles with mentioning the actual word program. So that's really my main question is that we talk about minorities being black and brown. However, we have to look at the culture being as the pop, as the street style of culture, because that's where the real need needs to be reached out to, because some of them don't know how to get it, don't know where to get it, don't know what to look for to get the help. So when I mentioned the word programming, I found that business was a better word to actually use to try to engage these men. I've had to take it down from a 10-week to a 5-week session, make it more intensive base with 2-hour sessions instead of hours because I wasn't having the long-term participation, which was more successful. I would probably be in the 90 percentile.
Okay, so is your question to Cleo how she's engaging people in the population in Chicago? Cleo, can you talk about some of your community connections and recruitment?
So no, that's not really my question. My question is actually, getting off of the African American and the Latino. How do we really engage them on the street level? Because the word program runs them away.
Okay.
So one of the things that I mentioned at the beginning that we did what's called a CBPR, Community-Based Participatory Research. So we actually engaged the fathers, the non-resident sons, actually the mothers of non-resident sons and resident families, to learn from them what their preference was. So we don't make an a priori assumption about who people are or what they would like. We actually went to them to ask them and to talk with them about that. And so every community we enter, this is something that we do to get a sense of what the community is. I hear what you're talking about because it also probably has an age component associated with it as well. Because the children that we are engaging in this intervention are 8 to 12-year-olds, some of our fathers are older, not necessarily teenagers. So it's a different kind of approach when you're trying to approach a teenage father versus when you're approaching a more mature father, because what they're in it for is the good of their child, that they're focusing on parenting, because one of the things we hear more often than not is, I didn't know he needed that. So they want this information to be able to interact with their child in a different way, and they also bring strength to the intervention because fathers learn from each other.
Right.
And that's also parallels in the teen fathers too. That is exactly what they're trying to do too.
Right. You know, and there's addiction across the board on both sides that I experienced.
I think let's see, do we have time for one more question?
There appears to be no further questions at this time, Jessica.
Okay. Well, then I'm going to take this opportunity to thank presenters and let everyone know that all the slides for this presentation and a video recording will be posted on the FRPN website. www.frpn.org will provide contact information for the presenters, so the gentleman who phoned in trying to reach Greg will be able to get that information there. Please, we'll be conducting another webinar in a couple of months, so stay tuned. And again, thanks to our presenters and thanks to everyone who joined us this morning. Have a great rest of the day.